And we begin this program by informing our viewers that Russia is threatening to rebuke the independence of Ukraine, its innocently unassuming neighbor. To weigh in on this issue, we have with us tonight Ms. Ananya Koppikar Moorthy, Faculty of Blatant War and Merciless Politics at Gorimaro Dandakara University. Welcome to our show, Ms. Koppikar Moorthy.
Yes, thank you.
What do you think will happen between Russia and Ukraine? Will there be an all-out war? Will US intervene? Will we witness a World War III?
In my opinion, I think we should all take a step back and take this conflict for exactly what it is. This is a normal war that happens generally, and I don't really think we as Indians should be worried about this. In fact, studies are now saying that there may be another COVID variant, so we should divert our mind and resources to that.
Okay, moving on.
Within the Cold War context, India fits well into the Soviet strategic thinking that aimed to foil the United States and China's geopolitical offensive. In realpolitik terms, India and the Soviet Union's congruent geopolitical interests aided the strengthening of relations between the two states. Having said that, the relations were also marked by deep suspicion. Stalin, for example, thought very low of India's policy of non-alignment. Post-Stalin, however, USSR realized the importance of this policy in the larger strategic framework as it offered newly independent Afro-Asian countries an alternative to joining US-led military alliances. India's socialist orientation helped to strengthen this alliance with the Soviet Union. As the Cold War progressed, US saw the South Asian region as majorly peripheral to its central strategic needs. However, few American administrations did view India as potentially important due to its proximity to communist China. Due to this, it provided India with substantial economic assistance, especially when India's ties with China began to deteriorate. While US sympathized with India's policy towards non-alignment, US was irked that the policy did not translate into genuine non-partisanship. Instead, India tilted away from the US and towards the Soviet Union, especially after the 1970s. With the end of the Cold War and the blurring of the sure compass of the East-West axis, political alignments of the past were beginning to give way. In South Asia, US and China seemed to be the primary beneficiaries of this tactical realignment. The source of divergence between Indian and Russian interests lies in the continuing problems that Russia faces in its relations with the US. The consequence of this confrontation is that Moscow has increasingly leaned on China both for support as well as a way to undermine American power. From the late 1990s, India's relationship with the US got stronger while its relationship with Russia became more transactional. Moreover, India wanted to dehyphenate itself from Pakistan and put an end to the concept of two-country rule. While US dignitaries seemed to recognize this, Russian diplomats made statements where it called Pakistan an, quote, important friend, unquote. The crisis in Ukraine began with protests in the capital city of Kiev in November 2013 against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to reject a deal for greater economic integration with the European Union. After a violent crackdown by state security forces unintentionally drew an even greater number of protesters and escalated the conflict, President Yanukovych fled the country in February 2014. In March 2014, Russian troops took control of Ukraine's Crimean region. It then formally annexed the peninsula after Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation in a disputed local referendum. In July 2014, the situation in Ukraine escalated into an international crisis and put the United States and the European Union at odds with Russia. Since February 2015, France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine have attempted to broker a cessation in violence through the Minsk Accords. Russia, however, finds Ukraine's orientation towards the EU and NATO as untenable to Russia's national security. In March 2018, the US State Department approved the sale of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, the first sale of lethal weaponry since the conflict began. As of February 2022, Russia appears to be making all the preparations for war, moving military equipment, medical units, and even blood to the front lines. Against this backdrop, diplomatic talks between Russia and the US and its allies have not yet yielded any solutions. The conflict is about the future of Ukraine. But Ukraine is also a larger stage for Russia to try to reassert its influence in Europe and the world, and for Putin to cement his legacy.
While the Russian Ukraine conflict might seem far away from any of India's immediate worries, the conflict itself has great implications when it comes to understanding India's current diplomatic strategies and its prospective course of action for the future in case a war breaks out. Historically, during the Cold War, India had made a policy to stay non aligned with either of the two major power blocs. In the face of the recent Russian Ukraine conflict, India seems to be taking a similar approach to maintain a balanced view. This can be seen when India said at the UN Security Council that a quiet and constructive diplomacy is the need of the hour, and any step that could escalate the tension should be avoided. Russia also stated that they welcomed India's balanced, principled, and independent approach. The non aligned stance India is taking now is very similar in its ideology as it was during the Cold War period. However, the actions and decisions of India seem to be more proactive in the light of the Russian Ukraine conflict as the stakes concerning political and economic stability seem to be higher. India's non aligned stance and proactive response to initiate peace has its root in its unique geopolitical and trade relations, which have grown and become more interdependent since the Cold War. Hence, this video will primarily address two main issues: economic impact and the China factor. Crude oil prices have been above $90 per barrel for more than a week now. Tensions between Ukraine and Russia have been a major reason for the recent spike in crude petroleum prices, and a military conflict between Ukraine and Russia is bound to worsen the situation. According to data from the US Energy Information Administration, Russia had a share of 12.5% to 13% in global crude oil production, which is almost half of the total crude oil production in the OPEC countries in the Middle East region. If crude prices stay at the current level, or worse, increase even more, most of the budgetary calculations could become redundant as the government would face various economic challenges on the fiscal inflation and current account front. The second issue for India is on the geopolitical front as it caters to India's relations with its neighbor, China. India has historically had conflicted relations with China, especially concerning border disputes. And due to China's recent increased investments in India's neighboring countries, especially Pakistan, as well as its Belt and Road Initiative, India's geopolitical position has become increasingly sensitive and critical. While India historically had good relations with Russia, Russia's growing relations with China has hindered the level of cooperation and alliances that India and Russia could engage in. In light of the Russian Ukraine conflict and the emergence of the two main blocs of Russia and the West, similar to the Cold War, India's position becomes critical. On one side, India has strengthened its strategic alliance with the US, and on the other hand, its sourcing of military equipment from Russia has been coming under greater scrutiny. And given India's strategic efforts to pose a challenge to China, a direct conflict with Russia might change this approach. In conclusion, while it might be difficult for India to sit on the fence if Russia does enter into a military conflict with the West, aligning with the West would create geopolitical tensions with China at India's borders, and aligning with Russia would hamper the flourishing trade relations with the West. Hence, looking at the geopolitical and economic position of India, a non aligned stance would be the most suitable direction for India to take, even in a situation of probable war between Russia and Ukraine, so as to incur the least cost.
1 week later.
Moving on to the new COVID variant.